Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin today's conference, second conference, we kindly ask you to turn your mobile phone to vibrate mode to ensure the smooth progress of the event. And additionally, please note that smoking is strictly prohibited inside the building. So if you wish to smoke, please use the designated smoking area outside the building on the first floor during the break. Only English and Korean will be spoken for this conference. So if you want simultaneous interpretation, please set your device on channel 1 for Korean and number 2 for English. So, Ongjeongdae, my name is Sang-wook Park. I'm a climate and energy correspondent of JTBC and today's moderator of Conference2. It is great pleasure and my honor to chair today's conference about the role of journalism in confronting climate change and environmental shifts with great journalists from different countries. As mentioned before, the theme of second conference is the role of journalism in confronting climate change and environmental shifts. As global temperature rise, the world is witnessing a cascade of extreme weather. Blistering heat waves, relentless downpours, and unexpected snowstorms disrupting life as we know it. And in here, South Korea, wildfires that lasted for about a week killed 30 people, injured dozens, and burned thousands of hectares of forests. Because of this change, species are vanishing, new ones are emerging, and humanity finds itself caught in the middle of nature's shifting tide. Meanwhile, new viruses continue to emerge and spread, ignoring borders and reminding us just how interconnected and vulnerable our world truly is. As we witnessed during the COVID-19, which swept across the globe and left devastation in its wake, it became undeniably clear climate change and infectious diseases recognize no borders and are not confined to any single nation. In today's interconnected world, the role of journalism transcends borders, demanding sharp environmental oversight and relentless vigilance. Now, more than ever, all nations, whether developed or developing, regardless of religion, culture, or lifestyle, must unite to craft collective responses and implement policies that address these shared urgent challenges. So, at today's second conference, journalists from around the world will gather to share insights into their country's climate and environmental policies, discuss strategies for collaboration tailored to national circumstances, and explore the most effective role that journalism can play in addressing this critical global change. First, let me introduce our speakers of today. Starting from my right side, BREWSTER, the Senior Defense and Foreign Policy Correspondent at Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and Tsegahun Asefa SHIMEKIT, the Senior News Editor at NBC Ethiopia TV, and Gianmarco VOLPE, the Global Desk Chief at Agenzia Nova in Italy, and lastly, Yoon Ji-ro, the Director of Next in Korea. The presentations will follow the order I introduced. After all the presentations, speakers will share their opinions on each presentation. And lastly, we will have a general discussion with all participants. So, all right, please welcome BREWSTER with a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an enormous privilege to be able to come and speak with you, particularly at a time when our profession is under threat and what we do is often questioned by the people whom we serve. So I think it's exceptionally important that we have this conversation, and I also think that it is incredibly important that as journalists, we not only hold authority and governments to account, but we also ask ourselves critical questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it and how we approach stories. So I would really like to thank the World Journalism Conference for inviting me and for allowing me to share a few thoughts. You're probably wondering Why is it that the National Defense and Foreign Policy Correspondent is talking about climate change? And I'm really pleased to be able to have this conversation with you because what has been happening in the realm of climate change has increasingly been intruding upon the sort of hard power aspects that I have covered for the better part of the last 20 years. And, you know, as journalists, we often berate governments for a lack of vision, creative thinking. And we go on about institutions that don't connect the dots on some of those complex policy issues of our day. And we complain and critique governments for not learning the lessons of history. Yet I'm here to tell you, in my experience, when we look at the issue of climate change, we as journalists are often just as guilty of the same myopic approach. You're probably saying, how is that? Well, we rarely connect the dots, and the dots these days are becoming increasingly clear to connect. Because when we talk about climate, it usually falls into selected bins. It falls into science, policy, protest, and politics. Rarely is it spoken about in terms of its effect on national security in each of our nations. Climate change is becoming a driver of geopolitics, whether it is the melting of the polar ice cap in the Arctic, raging wildfires, not only in this country, but in North America and elsewhere. California is a recent example. Natural disasters, droughts, and food insecurity that lead to mass migration. Now, it's not like the warnings have not been there. We've been hearing them for the better part of the last 20 years. We just haven't really been looking or paying attention. The US National Security and Intelligence Estimate of 2008 put it this way: we judge global climate change will have a wide-ranging implication for US national security interests over the next 20 years. The United States depends smoothly on a smooth functioning international system ensuring the flow of trade and market access to critical raw materials such as oil and gas, and security for its allies and partners. I know how ironic those words seem today, but it goes on to say that climate change and climate policies could affect all of these things. Domestic stability in a number of key states, the opening of new sea lanes and access to raw materials, and the global economy more broadly, with significant geopolitical consequences. That was in 2008. Again, in 2015, the White House's national security strategy. Climate change is an urgent and growing threat to our national security, contributing to increased natural disasters, refugee flows, and conflicts over basic resources like food and water. The present-day effects of climate change are being felt from the Arctic to the Midwest, with increased sea levels and storm surges threatening coastal regions, infrastructure, and property. Let's pause and take a look at that for a second. Contributing to increased natural disasters, refugee flows, and conflicts over resources. Keep in mind, that is a 10-year-old US strategy, but it's not what we're seeing today. Natural disasters that, in many respects, require a military response, even if it is to move humanitarian supplies. I can only tell you a little bit about the experience of my country. In my country, the military has been used regularly to fight forest fires. In 2023, the Canadian military conducted 181 straight days of operations supporting civilian authorities. That was a record. And most of it was dealing with climate-related emergencies. The argument in my country has been that while the military is fighting forest fires, it's not training to do its regular job. That, mind you, is unique to Canada because in my country we still have trouble defining what role our military plays in society. But it's an illustration of how climate change has had a direct impact on national security. Now, when you look at climate coverage writ large, it is an underreported, underappreciated aspect of what we do, particularly when you look at it through the lens of how it affects national security. In countries like Canada, it has been a little bit more front and center, but not by much. When you step on the global stage at the COP conferences, it's all about emissions targets, phasing out of coal, the driving of zero plastic waste, and protecting more of nature and advancing coastal resilience. What's interesting, in my opinion, is that I'm not alone in my assessment, because the 2021 study of the Global Environmental Change, which is a peer-reviewed international journal, looked at how climate was covered by the media. It found, by and large, there's a big difference between the way climate is covered in the global north and in the global south. It found that countries from the global north cover climate change more frequently, but countries from the global south focus more on its challenges and implications for society writ large. And I think there's something to be learned from that. In 2021, NATO recognized climate change as a, quote, threat multiplier in its Climate Change and Security Action Plan and introduced an annual high-level dialogue on climate change and security. Now, as someone who has covered every NATO summit over the last 20 years, save 2 of them, I can tell you that the Alliance's recognition of climate change as a threat was long overdue, but also largely underreported. At the 2021 summit, Canada offered and has subsequently established a NATO Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence in Montreal. Its focus, among other things, is to help reduce the impact of military activities on climate. Big, heavy pieces of military equipment produce a lot of carbon, and battles also produce a lot of carbon. Now, one of the biggest aspects of the center's research is mitigating the effect of climate change on military institutions. Now, as the center noted, climate change tests the resilience of military installations, infrastructure with strategy, and sites being vulnerable to rising sea levels, melting permafrost, and extreme weather events. But NATO's not alone. In June 2023, the European Commission's Joint Research Center and the European Defence Agency published a report on climate, energy, and defence and the nexus among all of them. And that included actions for the EU defence and to ensure the climate resilience and energy sustainability. The EU is also placing emphasis on adaptation and making sure that military capabilities and infrastructure are ready to meet the challenge of climate change. Now, once again, folks, a lot of this, in my estimation, has flown under the radar and goes largely unnoticed by the public because both environmental and defense journalists and their editors often don't understand the nexus of environment and national security, or perhaps they don't care. The World Economic Forum, however, recently sat up and took notice, saying, "We live in this era of connected shocks. So a food crisis in one community can become a migration crisis in another context and can become a security crisis in a third." The Council on Foreign Relations went a step further in the fall of last year with a detailed examination of how climate change is increasingly a driver in conflict, and what it wrote was stark. With individual countries, climate change increases the likelihood of civil war and that civil war could break out. For example, research has found that a rise in the average temperature of 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit is linked to a 4.5% increase in the incidence of civil war. How they come up with that, I'm not entirely sure, but climate is also linked, according to the report, to having wars last much longer. For example, some of the research suggested that the ongoing civil war in Syria was made worse by climate change. They cite the idea of desertification and the reduction of agricultural lands placed great strain on the Syrians, leaving increased power in the hands of violent actors who controlled access to food and other resources. They argue that severe drought also led to young men moving into urban centers seeking work, where they became more vulnerable to recruitment by militant organizations. Now, it is important to point out that other scholars dispute the claim and suggest that the connection between climate and the extension of wars is not necessarily that clear. But the report does go on to say that climate-related factors can contribute to the onset of violence and make it worse, and can even by themselves be exacerbated by conflict. When wars break out, sometimes partly sparked by climate change, military responses can in turn cause more damage to the climate in a vicious cycle. Wars that involve using extensive military equipment, advanced weaponry, and other technologies can increase greenhouse gas emissions, destroy and contaminate ecosystems, and cause other harmful outcomes. Now, nowhere in the estimation of this Canadian is climate being felt more keenly than in the Arctic. But even in my country, the relationship between climate and national security is poorly understood by the public and by the media writ large. It's underappreciated. Temperatures in the Arctic are rising at twice the rate of the rest of the world on average. That in turn has led to melting glaciers and ice sheets, factors that contribute to rising sea levels. What's happening in the Arctic could lead to global changes in the fishery and food industry and food insecurity overall that places an additional burden on economies, societies, and institutions around the world. Now, where the nexus between climate and national security has been covered, it's mostly been in the realm of how it is beginning to reshape geopolitics. And I say it's only just beginning, because sea lanes, once often choked with ice and glacial sheets, retreat, are opening up resource competition among the great powers. Take, for example, Greenland, which has been in the news recently, perhaps for all the wrong reasons. Now, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory published an analysis in the journal Nature last year. The report took a comprehensive look at retreating ice sheets using satellite data and GPS from 1985 to 2022 with more than 250,000 data points. One of the 207 glaciers in the study, 179 had retreated significantly since 1985. 27 had held steady, and one had advanced just slightly. Areas of critical minerals, once inaccessible, are now within reach in Greenland. And it's any wonder that the Trump administration is prepared to use military force to acquire that territory. The same might be said, however, for Canada's far north. Yet, most of the coverage of the Arctic and climate revolves around how accessibility will create ecological damage. There is reference to the militarization of the North and the potential for conflict, but the most serious military observers dismiss outright the notion that wars could be fought over inhospitable Arctic territory. Yet, militaries all around the world continue to train for such a possibility. At this point, I'd like to return to where I began, because we as journalists have to do a better job of connecting the dots between climate change and what's happening geopolitically, globally, in our attempts to explain to the public the inexplicable events of what's happening in our world at this moment. We live in perilous times, environmentally and now geopolitically. Climate change is spoken about in apocalyptic and existential terms. The apocalypse may be upon us, but it might not look entirely like we've been expecting for the last 20 years. And on that cheerful note, I'll end it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you for your speech, Journalist Brewster. Well, I'm gonna have the time to wrap up all the presentation after four speakers all finish their presentation. So now let's hear Tsegahun Asefa SHIMEKIT's presentation with a big hand.
Good afternoon, everyone. The esteemed guests and the journalists all over the world. I just want to say thank you for JAK, Journalist Association of Korea, for this incredible opportunity. My name is Tsegahun Asefa. I'm from East Africa, Ethiopia. Is there anyone who had a chance to visit Ethiopia? Really? Thank you. So if you have a plan to travel, don't forget to consider Ethiopia as your destination. Believe me, you're not going to regret on your decision. By the way, we Ethiopians and Koreans have a unique historical background. I'm not going to tell you that. You can search it on the internet. As you know, most of the time the afternoon presentations are overwhelming, but I will try to make it short as much as possible. So let's dive into our presentation. As you know, like climate change and environmental crisis is a huge issue that can affect every corner of the planet. So the climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. As you know, it's here, it's rapidly escalating. Over the past few decades, we have seen a dramatic increase in the frequency and severity of extreme events. Temperature across the globe have risen exponentially. The past decade has been maybe the hottest decade on the record. So even our moderator told us more than maybe around 30 Koreans are died due to this fire. The flood, the landslide, all the climate change effects are all over the world. So the issue is so huge. So as a journalist, we are witnessing unprecedented weather, vanishing species, and a world that is changing before our own eyes. And most sobering of all, however, is the fact that we are not just witness to this crisis, but are also a part of a solution. As a journalist, our responsibility is beyond reporting the facts, beyond reporting just the news. So we have to be part of the solution. So the question is, do we have a role to confront the climatic change and the environmental shifts? So as the crisis continues to evolve, the need for action has never been more urgent. It is not only about saving the planet, but it's about ensuring a habitable future for humanity. So what are the roles do we have, or what can we play on the confronting the climate change and environmental crisis? The role of journalism in addressing the climatic change. So journalism plays a fundamental role in raising awareness. So providing credible information and creating change. So we have to create awareness about the climate change, the ways through which journalists can shed light on environmental degradation, consequences, new virus outbreak, and the climate migration. The second is fact-based reporting, so emphasizing the importance of science-based, unbiased reporting and fact-checking and reporting on climate change and environmental change. So this is expected from the journalists. The platform for discussion and solution. Journalism is also a forum for a sharp discussion either of policy, measure of adoption, or new technology, and can amplify the voice of activists, researchers, and displaced people affected by the environment. So we have to be the part of solution. We have to give. Thank you. We have to be a voice for the voiceless. We need to create awareness regarding with the climate change. What are the challenges that the journalists face during weather reporting and the climate change? I try to write down some challenges as a journalist we face. The first is the complexity of the climate science. As you know, it's a little bit hard, and the jargons, the words are a little bit complex. So as a journalist, we need to break down those scientific facts into accessible knowledge to our audiences. Another is a misinformation and climate denial. Getting a truthful information at a time about the climate change is a little bit difficult. That is a challenge for the journalists that we face. Another is a political and corporate pressure. I can give you an example. In our Ethiopia, the southern part of Ethiopia, there is an industrial park. That industrial park manufactures the textile and the garment. So that industrial park released some chemicals to the lake around the compound. Some journalists tried to cover that news because that incident is affecting the society. Do you know what the industrial park corporates did? He just took measures on those journalists and tried to suppress the news. So political and the corporate pressures is some challenges for the journalists. Another is public apathy and media fatigue. The concept, even most of our audiences doesn't care about the climate change news. So we have to make it a little bit attractive when we give the news to the audiences, because most of the time the climate change news doesn't have many audiences. Another is lack of funding and resource. For example, as I give you the example earlier, from Ethiopia, the capital Addis, to the south part of the Ethiopia, if a journalist goes to cover those investigative journalism, he needs a budget. He should stay many days over there to cover the news. So a lack of funding and resources is one of the challenge. Another is challenging in access reliable data, I said this before, and bridging the gap between the local and the global impact. Most of our local audiences doesn't think the global climate change doesn't affect the local, but we have to bridge that gap. No one is safe, so we should give them the information that it is intersecting all over the world. That is the challenge that we face. Actually, at this topic, we have discussed on the morning session, journalism in the age of misinformation and AI. So as artificial intelligence and social media expand, false facts regarding climate change are spreading rapidly. So we have to fight disinformation through stringent fact-checking, verification of data, and source of credibility. So the role of media literacy in the helping audiences differentiate between the real and the mislead information. Let me give you just one example how AI is affecting our daily lives, especially in Ethiopia. As I said in the morning session, we have a lot of ethnic groups and political parties. So one of an AI guy created a guy that represents a certain political party, like he just used the clone voice technology. Then he said bad words about another ethnic groups. So he tried to create some conflicts over there. So if this is on this part, think you can guess about the climate change part. So we need to fight the misinformation or from the real and the fake. So we have to focus on that too. These are the stories of climate change in Ethiopia. The first one is this one, the disappearing lake, the case of Lake Haramaya. Can you imagine? This lake disappeared in Ethiopia due to climate change. Let me show you. This was the lake of Haramaya. This lake, sorry for the image quality. So this lake changed from this to desert. Yes, you can get it on the internet. Due to lack of rainfall, the rise of temperature, and massively using irrigation system around there, so this lake disappears. You can imagine how the society can be affected. Most societies are using this lake as their income or for their daily activities. So climate change is not a joke, it's really affecting all over the world. The drought. Before the drought, the floods and destruction of village in the south. Before 1 year ago, there is an accident happened, landslide around the southern part of Ethiopia. That's Tsegahun. More than 300 people died within a day, which is so destructive. And the drought and famine in Somalia, Afar region, these are the stories that happened in a climate change. I try to dig up a little bit, but it is a broad. So to fight against the climate change, the government tried to initiate that is a green legacy initiative, planting the trees. So the government has a strategy to plant around 30 billion trees on the coming 2030. So the strategy launched on the 2011. So starting from that, it's been 14 years, right? Yeah, 14 years. So the population gathered every year and planting trees around 20 billions. The government said 20 billions trees are planted, but as a journalist, if you say, no, this is it's not happened on the ground, you are just faking the numbers, so the measures will be taken on the journalists too. So these are the challenges, the stories in the climate change. So this. So let's conclude. The way forward. What is expected from the journalists? We are here around more than 60 countries. We are having a huge conference 2025, WJC. So working together for a sustainable future climate change is a shared global issue. No country can fix it alone. So cooperation is the key. Journalists of all backgrounds must collaborate to share investigative techniques. So I will expect that from you, what to do on the next, especially on the investigative part, what the journalist should do when he try to investigate the news. Get underreported environmental crisis noticed, develop cross-border solution to hold world powers accountable platform like this conference allow us to exchange knowledge, debate solutions, and a strategy on how to amplify our impact. So journalism is not just about reporting, but shaping the future. We must move beyond awareness raising, demand substantive policy changes and feasible solutions. Our common responsibility as a media is to maintain climate change on global agenda and avoid disinformation from the threatening process. So let's voice out and ensure a sustainable future. The future is on our hands. What we need is a collaboration and stand together. Thank you.
All right, thank you, journalist SHIMEKIT. And it's time for Gianmarco VOLPE. Well, please welcome with a big applause.
Perfect pronunciation, thank you. So, thank you everybody, good afternoon. Dear colleagues, let me say that it's an enormous privilege to share this experience with you. I am Gianmarco VOLPE, I'm the head of the Global Affairs at Agenzia Nova, which is an Italian news agency. It's a small news agency focused on foreign politics and economics, but very much dedicated. I like to begin with a place close to my heart, which is Abruzzo, the mountains of Abruzzo in the Apennine. It's on the eastern part of Italy. And this region is not well known, but it's shaped my childhood memories. I remember deep snow, crisp air, and the joy of skiing. But over the past 5 years, winters have grown too warm, snow is rare, and the cold barely lasts a few weeks. I miss those winters, but it's not just about nostalgia, as we say in Italy. It's a much bigger problem. For decades, Abruzzo thrived over winter tourism. In the 50s and in the 60s, millions were invested in ski lift, hotels, businesses, all based on the assumption that snow would last forever. Now that foundation is crumbling. I've seen it firsthand. Fewer visitors, quieter streets, and the struggling communities with less money. This isn't just about Abruzzo. It's happening all across Italy and all across the world. Climate change is reshaping communities, shifting population, and influencing politics. This is where journalism comes in. Reporting on climate change isn't just about tracking temperatures. It's about telling stories that make people care. Today, I'll explore how journalism is handling the climate change in Europe and in Italy too, the challenges, the successes, and why our work is more crucial than ever. This is Abruzzo. So, climate change, as my colleague from Ethiopia was saying, isn't a distant threat. It is happening now. In 2023, Europe faced record-breaking heat. Rome and Palermo soared past 40 degrees. You sweat just standing there. Abruzzo's mountains are melting, and Venice saw repeating floodings. Yet numbers alone don't drive action. Stories do. Consider this. A scientist reports that Italy is 1.5 degrees warmer since 1980. Informative, but forgettable. Now, imagine a journalist taking you to Roccaraso in Abruzzo, where once bustling sky slopes sit empty, hotels remain closed, and jobs disappear. That image stays with you. Journalists also hold policymakers accountable. In Europe, we have the Green Deal. Informative. It's a plan that aims for carbon neutrality by 2050. Italy promised to stop using coal by 2025, but things have slowed down. Then journalists exposed the delays and pressured for action. That's the power of the press, to keep things move forward. But beyond exposing problems, we also highlight new ideas and solutions, like solar energy projects in Italy, wind farms across Europe. We report not just the crisis, but also ways to fix it. Now, talking specifically about Italy. It's one of the most affected countries in the world by climate change. In the north, mountains are melting. In the south, beaches are shrinking. Milan, for example, battles high level of pollution. Sicily fights wildfires. Thousands had to run from them last summer. And Tuscany was hit by floods, turning its streets and villages into rivers. These aren't rare events anymore. They define our new reality. Italian journalists work hard to cover those changes. But we also face challenges because it's all happening at the same time. Puglia's olive trees are dying, Sardinia has too many tourists, Abruzzo's snow is gone. People get tired of bad news and readers experience what we call climate fatigue. Nobody wants to feel sad at breakfast. Don't you think so? Besides, many prefer quick, sensational headlines over slow, investigative reporting. Traditional newspapers like Corriere della Sera have lost half of their readership since in the last 25 years. While digital platforms, favor crime and controversy over extensive climate coverage. In addition, smaller editorial offices in a region like Abruzzo struggle to survive, and journalists earn very little. Who can afford to spend a week checking if a mountain is melting? I guess not many. There's also resistance to climate coverage. A 2022 study found that only 35% of Italians actively follow environmental news. In the meantime, social media algorithms prioritize engagement over accuracy, amplifying political divisions all over the world. In addition, some people also see green policies as a threat to the economy. So covering climate change means navigating these tensions. At Agenzia Nova, we focus on how climate change affects politics and economy worldwide. Despite limited resources, something that we are used to, we have people trying all over to show to the Italians how climate change impacts everyday life. even if it's happening in another part of the globe. When droughts ruin Africa's Sahel, migration to Italy increases, influencing national policies. Arctic ice loss opens new shipping routes affecting Italian ports. Floods in Asia disrupt tech supply chains, raising the cost for Italian companies. These aren't distant issues, they hit home. For example, we covered India's heat wave and its impact on rice crops. When prices went up, Italians suddenly cared because it made risotto more expensive. So we try to show those links. Sometimes that's what makes climate change relatable. Also, Europe has a messy climate battle to fight. Covering climate change across the continent is very complex. We are 27 nations with different problems and priorities. Germany still relies on coal. Spain is dealing with desertification, and the Netherlands is fighting with seas. We want to tell one story for them all, but a single narrative is hard to craft. Because in the end, an Abruzzo farmer doesn't care about the Swedish ice, and the Greek fisherman ignores the Dutch sea walls. Besides, right now, Europe's focus is on Ukraine, and the priority is on defense. But that's fair. War is a serious matter, and security is a top priority. But as military budgets grow, money for green projects gets smaller, and the Green Deal feels distant. The problem is that in the meantime, the climate change won't take a break. And that's why journalists must ensure climate issues remain in the conversation by pushing leaders to remember it. Even now, misinformation makes our job harder. In 2024, false claims spread online, accusing the European Union of harming farmers on purpose. This is because people got mad in France and in Poland. Correcting those stories is important, but dealing with online noise is always a challenge. Europe has many voices, and it's hard to make one loud climate call. Now, the big issue. Donald Trump back at the White House in 2025, and the climate diplomacy faces new challenges. He left the Paris Agreement again and denies climate change, shaking up global efforts. But the US is a big polluter, and not being involved weakens global arrangements. Trump calls climate change a hoax, yet he now seeks to assert control over Greenland precisely because the melting ice caps caused by climate change have opened new Arctic routes. It is this type of contradictions that we journalists must be vigilant. It is on this that we can leverage to make a difference. China stays in the Paris Agreement but prioritizes its own 2060 targets and developing nations, already struggling with climate's impact. At COP29 in Baku, leaders promised action, but without the United States, progress is tougher. In conclusion, journalism needs more support. Funding for investigative work, training to better understand science, public trust in our work. In Italy, media budgets are very short. Should we create maybe a help news fund? Agenzia Nova operates on tight resources. More funding would allow us to expand vital climate coverage, for example. We also need better tools, advanced data analysis, stronger fact-checking, and ways to counter misinformation, because Abruzzo winters, Venice water, they're still here to save. Journalism is our voice. It can call us to protect the Apennines and the Mediterranean and our shared future. It's imperfect and sometimes weak, but when improved, it becomes a powerful force for change. This is my dog, Poppy, in snowless Abruzzo. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you for the speech, journalist Volpe. Well, are there any journalists from the States? No, okay.
We should have one.
Yeah.
We need one. Yeah.
Oh, well, he's very close to the States, but
He's close.
actually coming here, my thought was, do I have to bring my coffee like espresso because here's Mr. Volpe, or Canadiano because of BREWSTER, so. But there's no journalist from the States today, okay. So, well, our last speaker is awaiting. Please give Director Yoon a big hand.
Wow, I'm nervous. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with so many journalists from all over the world, except the US. I'm Jiro, the Senior Director of Media at the Korean Climate Energy think tank, Next Group. And many of you attending this conference today are from the media, so you may wonder why a think tank staff member is speaking here. In fact, I stood in a similar position at the 2021 World Journalist Conference as a journalist. Since then, 4 years have passed, and many things have changed, not only for me personally, but also in the global and Korea's landscape. That's why I'm here to suggest that our definition and perspective on climate reporting must also evolve. While preparing for this presentation, I revisited the remarks I had made 4 years ago. As you may recall, 2018 saw the rise of major civil disobedience movements like Extinction Rebellion in the UK and Greta Thunberg's activism in Sweden, which brought climate politics to the forefront. Then came COVID-19, further heightening awareness of climate issues. In the US, the Sunrise Movement helped push Democrats into power. Korea followed the suit, declaring the Green New Deal and a 2050 carbon neutrality target in 2020. At the time, I observed that climate news was surging in volume and emphasized the need for a qualitative leap in climate journalism. So, how have things changed over the past 4 years? I'd like to talk about this from two angles. First, the media consumer, and then the media providers. Let's start with the consumers. According to a media audience survey by the Korea Press Foundation at the end of last year, 71.4% of respondents said climate change coverage in Korea is still insufficient. Only 3.3% thought it was sufficient. A separate survey conducted earlier found that over half of respondents who said they rarely see climate change coverage cited the reason that such reports do not stand out. I wonder what you think of these results. Personally, I don't believe this simply means that media interest in climate change has faded once again. There are two key implications here. First, it's possible that people are not recognizing articles related to climate change as climate change stories. This graph shows the number of articles by keyword in Korea's national daily newspaper from 2005 to 2024. It's clear that climate-related articles surged in volume 4 years ago, but the trend seems to have slowed again from 2022. At this point, I would like to highlight this article. It's a part of story regarding power grid, and since it's there are so many sentences, I'll give you like 10 seconds to look through it. You can just read the highlighted ones. Yes, time's up. The title of this article is Power Grid Expansion Delayed by 66 to 150 Months, Ongoing Conflicts Unresolved. Efficient grid operation is just as critical to the energy transition as the deployment of zero-carbon energy sources. However, without understanding the broader context, readers might not realize that this is an article related to climate policy. They might simply think, oh, there seems to be a problem with building transmission towers, and move on. This graph shows the volume of media coverage on power grid, battery, and ESG disclosures. Many of the articles featuring these keywords, like the example mentioned earlier, can easily be interpreted as stories about general social conflicts or economic issues, unless one reads them carefully or has sufficient background knowledge. In other words, as climate response has shifted from raising awareness to concrete implementation, the expanded scope of coverage may no longer be recognized by the general public as falling under the category of climate. The second reason behind the perception that there isn't enough climate reporting has to do with how we consume media today. In Korea, news consumption through mobile platforms and YouTube is exceptionally high. While the degree may vary, similar trends are likely observed in your countries as well. More recently, messenger apps have also become popular channels for news. The key feature of these platforms is that users selectively consume content they choose to follow. In other words, even if someone has above average interest in climate change, unless they actively seek out related stories, they are unlikely to come across them. Naturally, this brings us to the question of news production. What exactly is a climate story? I left the newspaper industry I worked at for 18 years and moved to a think tank 2 years ago. Still, since I oversee media work, I regularly meet with journalists, and I often hear dedicated climate reporters share their frustrations, like, it's hard to write climate stories. The companies doesn't welcome them. I felt the same way when I was in the field. But again, what is a climate story? I believe everyone attending this conference agrees that we are living in an era of climate crisis. We must achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is now clear that exhilarating roar of a Ferrari V12 engine or the exclusivity of a Gulfstream private jet can no longer be seen as mere symbols of aspiration. Breaking away from fossil fuels is more than a revolution. I believe that climate is not a niche topic reserved for specialized journalists or specific government departments. Climate is not just an item, it's a perspective. It means we need to look at everything we encounter from morning to night through the lens of climate. When you assess cost and profitability in any area, we must also simultaneously consider emissions and reductions. But discussions about the latter are still regarded as nothing more than a mere item. Let me give you an example. US President Donald Trump is urging South Korea to participate in Alaska's natural gas project. Articles and reader comments about this story mostly focused on economic feasibility, whether this deal would benefit Korea in trade negotiations, whether we could recover the massive investment costs, etc. These are necessary discussions, of course, but at the same time, the carbon budget that would be consumed by burning Alaskan gas and the risk of fossil fuel assets becoming stranded should also be part of the conversation. Yet, these perspectives are still treated as separate climate items handled by environment reporters. This shows that climate is still not a fundamental part of how we evaluate stories. The climate crisis is not something that can be resolved by one sector alone. Politics, economics, culture, and even sports must all be viewed through the lens of climate. And this responsibility lies with you. As climate response becomes increasingly technical and society consumes information more selectively, the climate lens grows even more essential. That said, there is a hurdle in the way. Applying climate criteria to every sector requires expertise. A climate perspective is not about using adjectives like serious, concerning, or unjust. To speak objectively about the impacts on emissions and reductions, we need both specialized knowledge and networks that can help share this perspective. That's where I come in. The think tank I belong to conducts quantitative research on energy and industrial transition. Because it's technical and data-driven, it can be difficult to understand unless you are a specialist in the field. My role is to translate that expertise so that the insights don't remain confined to a handful of experts. Your countries may already have many excellent civil society organizations, including think tanks, that provide knowledge and perspective, or you may still be in the process of building them. But even where such resources are limited, climate-focused reporting is still possible because we are connected. Last year, I had the opportunity to cover COP29 in collaboration with the Tsegahun, a Korean newspaper I worked for 2 decades. I wanted to tell the climate story from the perspective of Central Asia and the Caucasus. Too often, we interpret global climate issues through a Western or global North lens. I believe that looking at the issues from Central Asia and the Caucasus would reveal a different set of complexities. But it was extremely difficult to find local CSOs and experts in these non-English speaking countries where civil society work is often constrained. Despite this, I was able to carry out effective pre-research and field reporting thanks to JTBC, online video conferencing, and collaborative tools like Google Sheets. It's hard to apply a climate lens to every sector, but there are surprisingly many resources available to support that effort all around the world. I hope you will take full advantage of them so that climate can move beyond being just a news item and become a mainstream perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Director Yoon. Well, we have heard from all 4 speakers. Well, to wrap up, firstly, journalist BREWSTER highlighted how media often narrowly frames climate change as merely an environmental or political issue, emphasizing the need for coverage from national security and geopolitical perspectives. He explained how melting Arctic ice, wildfire, and natural disasters escalate international tensions and refugee crises, using examples like the Canadian military's response to wildfire and NATO's establishment of the Climate Security Center. He argued for a more serious consideration of climate change as a national security threat. And our second speaker, journalist SHIMEKIT, stressed that the climate crisis is no longer a distant threat, but an urgent issue facing us today, urging responsible journalism to tackle it actively. He emphasized the importance of science-based, objective reporting to counter climate denial and misinformation, while also advocating for media to serve as platforms for policy solutions and public discourse. Highlighting real climate disasters from Ethiopia, he called for international collaboration and proactive journalistic action. And journalist VOLPE vividly illustrated how climate change impacts local economies and societies in Italy using the Abruzzo region as a compelling example. He argued that climate reporting should transcend mere problem statements and instead deliver relatable solution-focused narratives. Volpe also emphasized connecting climate issues to broader political and economic contexts to maintain public engagement. And Director Yoon underscored that climate journalism should no longer be viewed merely as a specialized environmental issue, but should be integrated as a fundamental perspective across all sectors. She advocated for systematically including carbon emission and climate impact assessments in economic and political decision-making processes, while Yoon called on journalists to utilize specialized knowledge and expert networks to apply climate considerations comprehensively across diverse fields. Well, now we will give our speakers some additional time to share their thoughts. You may elaborate on your own presentation, ask questions, or share your opinions on other speakers' presentations. Well, each of you will have 5 minutes, and let's start from, how about journalist BREWSTER, please?
I was very impressed with all my colleagues' presentations because I think in many respects we were saying almost the same thing together, is that the lens of climate coverage has to be widened, and there has to be a deeper appreciation among the public about the subject. And I think that there's a couple of really interesting points that some of my colleagues made about the fatigue that the public seems to feel about a lot of the climate coverage. In my view, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it seems remote to them. And it's one of the reasons why I've argued that many of the things that we're seeing geopolitically today are related to climate change. And that is something that people can actually relate to. But at the same time, the coverage of climate issues is something that is labor intensive from a journalistic perspective, and it's also from the people who employ us, it's also an expensive proposition. And that is something that has to be overcome, but it has to be overcome by journalists arguing that climate and the effects of climate are more than just an environmental story. And I think that some of the recent events that we're seeing will encourage our editors and decision makers to examine those aspects.
All right, then SHIMEKIT.
Yes, thank you. Because all my colleagues mentioned an insightful presentation, we almost say the same thing. For example, Yoon said there is a media provider and the consumer. The media provider, it is insufficient to coverage the climate change, so the media should act something. And also the climate fatigue, our audiences, they are not interested totally most of the time about the climate change. So there is a debate between should we use some emotional stories or should we do sensationalizing the news in order to grab the audience. So there is a debate too, so I can raise these questions to get some comments from the audience and my colleagues too. Then we will cover on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And journalist VOLPE.
Yeah, it was a very interesting discussion because it makes us understand how many perspectives we can have on the same argument. And I think that if we would open the discussion to the public, to the other colleagues, we would hear more and more perspectives. So for each of us, Climate change is a different thing. We have different perspective because we have different issues in our singular countries. But I would like to underline something that, first of all, Murray said, because he touched an important argument. Our job is connecting the dots. I think that's a key word. And it connects not only our presentations, but also the 2 sessions of this conference. Because can artificial intelligence connect the dots? Can AI understand how to make climate news closer to each of us and more appealable? About Mr. SHIMEKIT.
SHIMEKIT, yeah.
Presentation, I thought that one important thing is to exchange our experiences, which are, of course, different. Different experiences as different shapes the climate issue can take. And this can help us precisely to join the dots. Cooperation, in this case, is the key. And about Giro presentations, let me highlight this passage. Climate is not an item. It is a perspective, a view that shapes how we understand the world. We require our readers to make this shift. But I think that, first of all, we should make this shift when we write and when we set the agenda, which is the biggest power that we have.
All right, then how about Director Yoon?
Yes, I appreciate to all our colleagues, and thank you for sharing your insights. And I find it really interesting because at the beginning, Mr. BREWSTER started with drawing lines, connecting dots, and my presentation at the end was about making surface connecting lines. So I find it interesting. And actually, I have a question to Mr. BREWSTER. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yes, it's quite a technical question to answer, but my question is, your working area, is your working area military, focusing on environment, or are you an environmental reporter focusing on national security? Because I'm asking this because in Korea, there is a so-called newsbeat. If your company deploy you to cover a specific ministry, then it's not recommended to deal with other stories of other departments. So I'm asking this question: how you deal with this?
My background is national security, defense, and foreign policy. But as I was saying in my remarks, often lately, issues of climate have been intruding in areas of national defense, and it is something that I'll speak personally when I say, like, climate is something that I have been personally passionate about. I read a lot about it, but it's not my day job. But many of the stories that I have been writing about in the last 2 years have seen essentially climate intruding upon my day job. For example, there was a debate within the Canadian Parliament in the fall of last year about the role of the Canadian military and what it's supposed to be, because a lot of the times, as I referenced in my presentation, in last year it was being used for climate-related emergencies. And so, which is what inspired me to be talking about the connecting the dots and being able to look at things through like being able to look at climate, but being able to look at national security through a wider lens. So no, it's not strictly encouraged for the defense reporter or the foreign policy reporter to be intruding upon matters of climate. But I would suggest to you that it's inserting itself more into the debate, and which is once again why I mentioned Greenland, because the only reason we're having a geopolitical discussion about Greenland and is because of the fact that resources are now available and they're accessible. And while I'm not trying to put words in President Trump's mouth, I would suggest that it's the primary focus of his preoccupation with Greenland, because it certainly can't be about matters of defense and national security, because the United States has only one military base in Greenland now. It used to have 17. So it's not a matter of shoring up Arctic defenses. It is a matter of America having access to the resources that are stored in Greenland. And this is why I believe that we have to be looking at climate through a wider lens.
Right. I think the phrase "connecting dots" will be a phrase penetrating our theme of today. Well, this time we're gonna have some discussion with all of you, the participants. So regarding the topic or the presentation, you can share your own experience and opinion, and any suggestion is also welcome. So please raise your hand to speak. Then I will set the order of speaking, and our staff will hand you a microphone. So before speaking, please tell us your nationality and affiliation. Yeah, Mr. Sao.
Thank you. My name is Nisai. I'm from Cambodia. Thank you for all the panelists today for raising this very important climate crisis that we as journalists have been doing, but there's a lot more to do. But I have a question. For example, like we talk a lot about the strengthening the way or broadening our climate coverage and taking into account the challenges we have, for example, financial struggle. We need to move beyond the financial need that most of us, for example, in the least developed country will face. But just want to know from your experience, like what can we do more to ensure that we can do, because most of the time climate story are from the grassroots journalists, and they need financial support to do the big story and a very comprehensive one. But without finance, that's going to be an issue. But I just want to know, is there any way we can move beyond just financial need and get the story done in terms of like more collaborative or maybe cross-border collaboration? That's my question. Just move beyond financial need and get the story done. Thank you.
Well, who can?
Well, maybe I'll start. My suggestion would be to start by, as I've been saying, broadening the lens and look at your story that's in front of you through the lens of climate. Now, whether we're talking national security, but ask yourself, is there a connection to climate change in your story? And then you don't need an awful lot of evidence to be able to make the connection these days between, for example, a flood in one of your communities, or like famine or drought, or even migration. This has been one of my topics that I've been trying to talk to my colleagues about. Is when we talk about mass migration lately, a lot of it is climate induced, and that should be a boilerplate line in a lot of the stories that we write. So even just on a day-to-day basis, make sure that your framing, the framing of your stories, is run through some kind of climate lens. That's something that does not require cooperation. Yes, it does require some research, but in the end, it's a mindset. That's my opinion. That's something that you could do almost immediately.
Yeah, as I've said in my presentation, the finance in the budget is the key challenge for the climate change, as we talked. Even the government and non-government organization does not support this. So the question is, most of the time, I can give you an example. There is a radio show in Ethiopia, started in 2011, that focuses on the climate change, how the climate is really affecting the world locally and globally. I know him, that's my friend who started this program, but he doesn't have any support, or the government, even the NGO organization, doesn't give him an advertisement spot or budget for that program, because as we said that the provider and the consumer has a gap, so even the audiences doesn't want to look that program or listen to that, like we said, like climate fatigue, that is the huge issue. So actually we are responsible for this too. We need to engage, or we have to focus on our program. We have to make it more entertainment, or I don't know, this might be a debate, but we have to focus and work on to get a support. The government should act on too. So that's me.
All right. Okay. Oh, all right. Mr. Anwar? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the floor. I'm from Bangladesh. And you know, Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable country due to the climate change. As per the World Bank, as a report, that our 17% land will be going underwater if sea level as a rise. So it's a huge thing in Bangladesh. Even 30% of our land, the agricultural land will be gone. So my point is, I actually thanks all the speakers, especially Mr. Murray. That was a really good presentation. It's an eye-opening one. But I would like to ask you one thing, that as you mentioned that the global north and the global south, the reporting of climate change is totally different. Because like, as a global south, from Bangladesh perspective, as there are climate migration is increasing, so our media is more focused on loss and damage and other thing, because our carbon emission is very low. But from the global north, or your perspective, this is a different thing. So as you were telling that the connecting dots, what's your suggestion? How these dot, you can connect those dots? Like from our perspective, for the climate reporting, the geopolitics or national security, this is less important compared to the loss and damage. But the other hand, the geopolitics is more important maybe from your perspective. So as you are telling that the connecting the dots, what's your suggestion? And secondly, I would like to, from my Ethiopian friend, as you were mentioning that there is a lack of audience and we need funds. But I would like to know, the lack of audience means there is a lack of sensitization among the audience, right? So do you think there is a lack of sensitization in media as well? Because is there any lack of sensitization, the policymakers, the media gatekeepers, or the companies to cover more climate stories? So how we could actually face these challenges as journalists? Like, we have to sensitize the media first, then we can sensitize the audience. So if there is a sensitization, if there is a demand, then I don't think so that you don't need extra fund for reporting that. Because news report is news report. It's not a drama that we can make it dramatic to get more audience. So how actually we could focus on that and overcome those challenges? Thank you.
everything starts with the pen. You're holding the pen. You are framing the story. And as I was saying in response to the first question, it is up to us as individuals to connect the dots, to look at stories that come at us every day, and see if there is a nexus that involves climate. By writing it repeatedly, and it doesn't require any additional funds to do this, this is just in our own day-to-day coverage. By writing it repeatedly, we will be sensitizing not only our editors, but we will also be educating them, and we will be educating the public that climate touches everything now, almost everything. So it starts with us. It starts with us as individuals in being able to frame our stories, and be it national security, be it local, be it, is there a nexus? We have to be asking ourselves that question. So I believe that it starts with the individual.
Yeah, I'm not just concluding we have to sensitize to grab our audiences. I'm just emphasizing, like, if you even check your social medias, even for TikTok, when you scroll all those videos, you don't even see the climate-related videos most of the time. We don't get those videos in our platforms. That means we are not focusing, we are not creating enough awareness for our audiences how the climate change is really affecting every corner of the planet. So we have to work on, as Mary said, the pen is in our hand. We need to collaborate and work massively in order to create a change. That's the point.
Well, and regarding global north and south, Europe also plays an important role, right? So, Mr. Volpe, if you add some thoughts, then can you make some...
About global north and global south? Well, I think that global north and global south have one thing in common. In both ways, we have to start a cultural process, you know, because I think that it didn't start yet. That's my feeling. We must make people understand why climate matters, and they can do, you know, they can't understand in which way they involve them, in which way it touched their money. Okay, so I think that, and obviously my perspective is from global north, but we have to shift our mentality as journalists, because Marie is right. We have the pen, so we have the power. It starts with us. That's a movie, I think.
Yeah, okay.
I want to answer to the question about financial support. I think many of you might be interested in how I can get financial support. That must be a very practical question. And well, yes, financial support matters to cover climate change. For example, if you want to cover Conference of the Parties, like COP event, you have to buy flight tickets and you have to book an accommodation. That's all about money. But the same goes to every other sectors, like famine, natural disaster, welfare, education, and so on. So financial support is important to cover climate change, but it's not just a problem of dealing with climate issues. That's a universal problem for every sector. So, but if you really want to find, if you want to really talk about very specific issues that think that you think really important, then you can find global social and civil social organizations. There are some groups which specialized in helping journalists. If you have trouble finding any support, then you can ask them so that you can cover the specific issues. But in order to have that kind of support, you should have a really specific and relevant items to cover. Then maybe you can find financial support, I think.
All right. There are two journalists who in the queue. So first, Madam Inderjit. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm going to be quick because I'm sure there are others. I quite agree with you, Marie, that we got to flog the story. We just got to flog the story. But I think the problem that lies with us is, as journalists, you want a front page byline. And unfortunately, climate change still hasn't reached that front page story level. That's the way I look at it from a country, I'm Sabina Inderjit, and I look at it from India, which is leading the global south. So yes, you have a point, but I think we need to do a lot more. My question to you, Yoon, is very, very simple. You're a think tank, and we have a number of think tanks which have come up in the environment field. Do you have a consortium? One. And the second thing is that it's a comment, is that I've noticed that, you know, while a lot of journalists would write stories on climate change, and they will tell us, you know, the rivers are going to recede, and the weather is going to be, you know, so many degrees centigrade and what have we, which as a reader, as a journalist, but even as a reader, I wouldn't understand, it wouldn't catch my attention. But what caught my attention was a brilliant advertisement on water, saving water. And I would suggest that, you know, when you deal, just don't deal with the journalists. Tap the advertising agencies and tap companies. Because that one, I don't know, Shelley, whether in India you've seen this ad, it was about water preservation. It was brilliant in the sense that it shows a shower in a desert area. And the common man has never seen water in that particular area. And suddenly he goes there and he sees water. And then the people come with utensils and, you know, take that water back home for their cooking and everything. So just that 2 minutes or 3 minutes of advertisement made me, despite being just a journalist and reading a lot, made me ensure that I try to use minimum water in my flush if it's just in my bathroom. So that's a comment which I think you could take. But I want to know about the consortiums. Did you have a system of consortium? Do you deal with other countries, other NGOs? Do you have some kind of projects?
Yes, we do have consortium, but I don't know, I can call it consortium. Can I answer in Korean? Then you can use Sorry about the language barrier. Yes, okay. 이제 사실 지금 말씀하신 그 출신 국가와 한국은 조금 상황이 달라서 거기는 아까 싱크탱크나 이런 게 굉장히 많다고 말씀하셨는데 사실 한국에서는 싱크탱크라고 하는 것은 굉장히 신생 비즈니스입니다, 일종의. 그래서 사실 싱크탱크라고 부를 만한 그 민간 차원의 연구소는 굉장히 없고요. 그렇기 때문에 뭔가 저희가 기존의 환경단체나 혹은 비슷한 캠페인을 하는 곳과 분명히 같이 일을 하는 부분은 있지만 뭔가 이렇게 싱크탱크로 구성이 된 어떤 컨소시엄 같은 거는 사실 없습니다. 왜냐하면 싱크탱크라는 것 자체가 굉장히 새로운 형태의 그 기관이기 때문에 그렇지만 이제 저희 같은 경우는 언론, 제가 이제 오늘은 기자들의 모임이기 때문에 주로 언론과 활동을 하는 것만을 말씀드렸지만 사실은 어떤 특정한 목표를 달성한다, 우리가 기후를 위해 무언가를 한다라는 입장에서 저희는 뭐 기자들과도 물론 일을 하지만 사실 어떤 의회라던가 혹은 그거를 다루는 어떤 부처와 직접적으로 활동하는 식으로 더 많은 일을 하고 있습니다. 그 중에 일부로 제가 이제 언론 쪽을 담당하고 있는 것이고, 사실 저희는 이제 실제로 정책을 입안하는 사람들과 더 많은 직접적인 스킨십을 갖고 일을 하고 있습니다.
Well, for the madam over there with the scarf. Sorry, I can see your name, so.
It's okay. This is Iman Al-Faris from Jordan. Thank you for this great opportunity to meet you all and to have this useful and wonderful presentations. Actually, first, I would like to add something about the front page and the climate change issues. We, fortunately, in our region, we don't face this issue because due to the challenges of climate change that we have faced increasingly recently nowadays. Now, about my the question is about that as a journalist specializing in climate change and water reporting for more than 15 years, how can using AI tools help transform government strategies and policies to address climate change challenges and its impacts on water, especially in the Middle East, with knowing that Jordan has been classified as the world's most water-poor country in the world? And that in the middle of the region that is facing currently the greatest challenges of political tensions, wars, floods of refugees, and more pressure on the scarce natural resources and their impact on water pollution and equality, especially given that the content of annual climate change conferences did not adequately address these challenges on geopolitical level. Thank you.
Is there anyone who use AI while collecting some data or analyzing? Well, in that case, well, for my perspective, sometimes,
sorry.
I usually collect the data about the weather and climate, and I get the data officially from the website of Korea Meteorological Agency, etc. And then after getting that information, then I ask my AI to make some useful code to make some make program to analyze that data. So in that case, I use the AI, but in my personal opinion, we have to have to be careful when we ask the AI tool, what should I do or how can I do? Because it is a machine. The person who order is person, the journalist. So we have to make a good prompt. So we should use AI with them, with the data that you get. Then you can make some more specific and more detailed articles, I guess. And how about the geopolitical issues and another additional thoughts on AI?
I think that, as I was saying before, AI is a great instrument, and it can help us to be better journalists, to be more informed, to give a more precise picture of the situation. But we are the one who needs to connect the dots. We are the one who can make links between one country and another country, between what happens in the Sahel and what happens in Italy from an economic perspective. So I think we need to defend our role as journalists. And I wanted to say another thing about how difficult it is to get to the headlines with climate coverage. Let's focus also on how we cover the stories. Other kind of stories, for example. When we write about wars in Africa, for example, be sure that climate change is always part of the picture. So we have to make sure that when we tell about the root causes of the wars, we keep it in the narrative, and that's part of our mission too.
All right. Then journalist Walia. Yeah.
I'll make a couple of remarks before I come to my bit. Just to my Cambodian colleague there, there are not as many, but there are a few grants which are now available for, sorry. Yeah, but like, I mean, there are grants which are available to journalists across different continents. And we personally in our newsroom have found that very helpful to be able to do certain stories which wouldn't have been possible given the resources that we have. Because my name is Shelly, I'm the executive editor at The Quint. It's a small digital newsroom, independent media house in India. I wanted to actually talk about climate coverage. I loved all the presentations that were made earlier today in the afternoon, but Mr. Volpe's presentation really spoke to me because as an editor, for the last couple of years, we've been really trying to figure out what should be the approach when it comes to our climate coverage. So when we started out, we felt that the information itself was not very accessible to people. When you throw jargons like climate change, temperature 1.5 degree, like these things are not really something that people easily grasp. So a few years back, we started a video series which was called Climate Dictionary. Unfortunately, I mean, it was like a stand-up video where the journalist kind of broke down the terms, made information accessible. It did not do as well as we thought it would. Off late, I'll skip the middle bit, but off late, our approach is very similar to what you and your agency is trying to do, which is to keep the human at the center. So a directive that I've got from my boss is urban, human, and videos, so that we are able to reach out to as many people as possible and tell them the story that you want to tell. We've been trying this approach, and urban is, I'm saying urban also because most of our readers are urban, and also because climate change is more and more being felt in urban centers of India as well. It's not just in the rural parts where the farmers are suffering, it is the flooding. And I mean, we spoke about adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage just a while back. The consequences of climate change being felt in global south is way more adverse than a lot of global north countries can even imagine. Now, having said that, my question comes back to climate coverage. We are doing our best, and I can put my hand on my heart and say that we are really, really trying, despite being a small organization. But how do you justify, I mean, I want to ask you, how do you justify it to your, say, newsroom? And how do you measure the success of some of your human focus stories? You did say we are trying to get Italians to notice. We are trying to get Indians to notice. But how do you measure success of your stories? That's one. And how do you scale it? Because at the end of the day, my team, which is looking at politics in India, is going to be always much bigger than a 1 or 2 person team on climate change. How do we even stay relevant enough on Google search so that our stories sometimes, which are not very heavy on keyword, because climate disasters, low-hanging fruits. There is a climate disaster, wildfires. We did, like, you could even do stories about wildfires in South Korea and it will be read by an Indian audience. We did like a beautiful explainer on the California, sorry for using the insensitive word beautiful, but yeah, like we did a detailed, comprehensive explainer on the California wildfires, well-read, consumed everything. So climate disasters is very easy to cover. But how do you get them to care about the fact that on a day-to-day basis, it's entering your life. And while you are doing it, how do you scale it? Like, my only problem is how, for my newsroom and say for your agency, if you've had great success, if you can share some tips on that. How do you measure it and how do you scale it? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I think it's very honest from your point of view. It's a great question. Of course, there is not one single answer. And we should also, understand what success is for a news in terms of popularity, in terms of readers. I think that part of my response is that sometimes we don't have to necessarily think about success in terms of readers, but also in success in terms of what we give to society, what we give to the understanding of something. And about what we can do to make news related to climate more applicable to the general public, I think that we should go to, we don't have to be hypocritical. For example, Italian readers, really, I'm honest, don't care about why people is suffering in, I don't know, Cameroon. I hope to name one country with no representative here. We have to be honest about that. But we can tell an Italian reader why a crisis in Cameroon, a climate problem in Cameroon, a climate issue in Cameroon involve the Italy. So how it have an impact, how it has an effect on their money. So that's the only way I see here. I can make you an example. I was talking about, we were talking about India and the crops and the risotto. So my headline there is, do you know why your risotto costs more? It's because of India. You didn't know about it. So maybe that's something that catches the reader's attention.
Yeah.
My name is Vincent Boland, and I'm from Ireland. And I'd like to ask Mr. SHIMEKIT a specific question, if I may. In the last decade at least, and maybe even longer, the Ethiopian economy has been growing very strongly. It's a very big success story in Africa generally. And I just wonder, has the fact that the economy is growing and becoming more robust, and Ethiopia is obviously becoming richer, at least in relative terms, how does that impact on the climate debate, or has it impacted on the climate debate in Ethiopia itself? And does it make addressing the issue more difficult or less difficult? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you are right. Ethiopia is really on the right track. She's developing everywhere. If you go to Ethiopia right now, she's under construction. There are a lot of industries are started. So due to that fact, the industries has so many wastage or exposed to the environment. So it has effect. That's right. But parallelly, our government launched in 2011 the Green Ethiopia initiative in order to compensate that effect. So more than 20 billion trees are planted. So the government tries to create an awareness in the schools, starting from the primary schools, our students getting some knowledge about the climate change on their book. So you are right, there is an effect, but there is a compensation made by the green legacy.
Right, at the first row, will you bring the mic to the first row? Yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Aydam from Azerbaijan. Do you think we have a standing chance in fighting with the global corporations, as they are one of the major source of environmental destruction, as they actually started to own like digital media, social media, and get to pick the algorithm, which news will be the first one like the readers see, and how we can write about them in the era that they get to pick the algorithm? This is my question.
Oh, okay. Currently, actually the social media has a huge impact, even parallelly with when you compare it with the broadcast one. It's easy to go viral. I think we have to use hashtags. I don't have so much knowledge on this, but it has some effects to get viral. Or maybe, is there any expert on the AI or on the social media part?
And, well, Mr. VOLPE, and you also talked about X and etc. In your presentation. So how about your thoughts on the social media?
Well, social media is a very important instrument for us. It's becoming more and more important for our job. And that's another instrument, that's another weapon that we have at our disposal to make understand the people why it matters. And as I was saying before, I think that the human factor is the key. We need to explain people why they care about climate change, because they still don't understand why they care about it, why it's important, why it matters. And this is, I told it before, I said before, it's a cultural process, and thus it's a long process. So we need to mention my friend Donald Trump, fight, fight, fight.
All right. Well, yeah, Mr.
Hi, Albert from Singapore. I just want to continue. I've enjoyed the discussion very much so far. I just want to continue on this thread of climate fatigue. I think we've been talking about it quite a bit, but we've so far been talking about it from the perspective of trying to draw in the audience and to try to mobilize action by the government. So we write to raise awareness, we write about impacts on livelihoods, we write about natural disasters and so on and so forth. So I just want to ask the five of you, journalist to journalist, do you too yourself have climate fatigue? Because it's so difficult to get page one. And what keeps you going to your boss and keep saying, I'm sorry, I have another climate story to pitch again. And I hope you give me the best page placement or put it first in the bulletin. So how do you have climate fatigue, and what do you do about it yourselves personally?
Well, I'll start by saying that what I've been trying to suggest to everyone here is that pitching a narrow climate story to our editors is not something that we should be doing. We need to be broadening the lens. We need to be inserting climate into, if it's appropriate, into all other stories that we're working on, be it national security, be it others. Because that is the only way that we're going to end up defeating the climate fatigue that is taking hold in the public. Because I think that if you begin explaining to people that just from my perspective, that the actions of Donald Trump in Greenland have as much to do with climate change as they do with geopolitics, I think people will begin to get it. And I think that if it is across the spectrum, not only in matters of national security, but in other stories, even just day-to-day stories, that I think that it will begin to seep down into the consciousness of people, and people will begin to look at it as just as something more than just a climate story. I think people will begin to understand, to a point that was made earlier, people will begin to understand the impact on them, regardless of whether it happens in their backyard or not. And I also think to the very good question that was asked about whether or not information can be suppressed via social media, I think that the more pervasive the references are to climate within our copy and within the stories that we write, and the more that we explain to people the impact, the harder it would be to end up suppressing it.
And I'd like to add one simple example to you. For example, offshore wind. We all know that offshore wind plays an important role for energy transition. So we should say that it's good for our climate, but without saying climate, you can also say about offshore wind. For example, like you can approach to the subject with economic view, manufacturing view, because to build offshore wind, you need steel, you need carbon fiber, you need ship. So you can approach those topics with totally economic view without mentioning climate.
I just want to add something to my Singapore friend. For example, in our case in Ethiopia, the media is more focused after the climate change or due to the climate change when the disaster happened. Many media goes to the area and they just want to report and write stories, release the stories. But what we should do, what we focus is, we need to report the forecasts, or we should take proactive actions. Most of the time in our medias, we don't cover the proactive incident or the proactive actions or the forecast reporting to the audience, because the media think we don't get enough attention if we release this. But when some flood or due to some rainfall, when the flood happened or the landslide happened, all news is covered. These kind of peoples are our peoples are in numbers. So that's also the problem. We have to focus on the proactive action.
You have to be patient, especially if your boss is a part of another generation.
Yeah.
And you have to be smart to make him understand or make her understand why it matters. So it's a tough work, but we got to do it.
Yeah. Well, today we talked about climate fatigue, but I think it's time to deal with the climate blue, like, oh, we're gonna all die, everything will gonna be messed up. So we have to handle climate fatigue, but also climate blue at the same time. Well, for the last question, there were, sorry.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Antonia. I'm from Timor-Leste. So as all the country, we also face the problems of impacts of climate change, principally like floods. If it's raining like less than 1 hour, the city is already flooded. And like low production of agriculture, landslide, everything the speakers mentioned. So it's really important the media to report the impacts of climate change. And until now, our media they don't really like connect the points, but if something happen, like disasters happen, we always write about it. But to know the reason, like, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. What I was wanting to say is, our government have zero plastic policy, but it lasts only for like a couple of weeks, people not using plastic, but later, like a month or so, we back to using plastic, and the government didn't do anything until now. And many other policies that our government is doing, we don't really see the implementation, but the media in Timor-Leste don't really focusing on that, on the fact that our government don't really implementing the policies about climate change. So I really that it is really important that the journalists have more literacy about climate change, so they know that it is really important to report the climate change. But our association, Journalist Association in Timor-Leste, they are doing for example, media tour for journalists about climate justice. It was recently to raise the journalist awareness about writing about the impact of climate change directly to the people, especially vulnerable people in Timor-Leste. So I think it's a development. And the young groups in Timor-Leste, they do the beach cleaning and sensibilization to the population about the importance of recycling and everything. But the challenge for media is also not only the literacy, so that us as journalists can be more aware of our importance to tell story, but it's also to report the activities of the big company in our country, especially that have the company of oil and gas production and distribution. So we are a least development country, Timor-Leste, and we still extract oil for our state budget. And we are now the government now working with the Australian government to extract another oil project. So we still depend on oil and gas for our state budget, and the population. We are only focusing on the problem like natural disasters and everything. What I'm asking is, what is the speaker? What do you think about that? The fact that we are advocating for the climate change, to mitigate the risk of the climate change, especially for the population. But at the same time, our government is continuing exploring the possibility to extract more oils, and they have policies about how to have a sustainable development, but they don't really, in my perspective, they don't really implement it. So I really need your thoughts on that, on how us as journalists can like write about it and make some changes so that the government really doing the sustainable development. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, who can be?
I'll start.
Yeah.
As a journalist who has covered the National Parliament for over 30 years, I would have to say that we have to be consistent in pointing out the hypocrisy of our governments. It may not lead to changes, immediate changes, but we have to be consistent. We can't give up. We have to be constantly pointing out the difference between their words and what the actions are in terms, I mean, particularly where climate is concerned. Their support for oil and gas exploration versus what's happening in terms of environment itself. So it's not so, it's a battle of attrition, I guess, is the only way to put it. It's not something that's going to lead to immediate results, but it is something that you have to constantly be pointing out to the public, that there is hypocrisy in often what gets said.
Yeah, most of the time, as you know, the policies are just on the paper most of the time. The government release the policies, but what is happening on the ground is different from what is written. So we have to force the government. We don't have to give up. We have to push on.
Yeah, I think the consistency will be the key for the question. If we write the articles consistently and then we watch consistently, then it will make a change a bit. Well, it's already over 4, so we've talked a lot about the role of journalism today, and lately our media landscape has been dominated by shorter, more sensational content. That's why it has been even harder to explain the context and deal with the complexities of climate change, from the extreme weather events to industry or national security to trade, diplomacy, and politics. Nevertheless, with this changing media landscape, we should focus more on the essence of journalism. Journalism must play its part at every level or steps in our efforts to combat climate change and environmental shifts. Pointing out the problems in our society, bringing them up to the public agenda, helping them establish themselves as a policy agenda, monitoring the process by which they eventually become a policy, evaluating policies created, and taking feedback from civil societies and experts. These efforts should be evidence-based, data-driven, objective, and balanced, as highlighted in today's speakers' presentations. It will never be easy. However, with our fellow journalists here in Korea, Ethiopia, Italy, and Canada, we will be able to keep moving on a challenging journey. Well, this concludes Conference 2 of the World Journalists Conference 2025. Thank you again to our speakers, and please give them a big round of applause for their effort for today. And we will now have a short break. After the break, the special lecture will follow, and please be seated by 4:15 p.m. Thank you very much.